The reason why I spent 7 years running this entrepreneurship nonprofit is I saw the numbers around declining entrepreneurship around the country, and I thought that's a disaster. And it was a disaster in terms of jobs and opportunities and the economy, but it was also a disaster socially or culturally, because I had been formed myself like you as the head of this small business. And you're allowed to be a human being as the head of a small business. You know, you're allowed to do things that are frankly not economically optimal, just because you feel like it, because you like that person. In your case, you were like, guess what? I'm going to pay you all $70K. It's like, what? I could have hired you for $40K. Who cares? I'm going to pay you $70K because I think it's the right thing to do. And I think writ large, will benefit from it, but also I just feel like it, and I'm like and there's like this market logic that overrides everything if you're part of a very large corporation where you're not allowed to do anything that's economically irrational and thus human.
Yeah. Well, and the problem with that is it's creating a level of conformity where everyone's doing the same thing. I mean, if you look at a lot of the decisions that I've made and continue to make, they're decisions that I learned through all these various like CEO learning organizations, peer-to-peer learning organizations, and just a lot of business books. Everything out there is like there's only one way to do things. I mean, a pretty recent example is like when the pandemic hit, we lost 55% of our revenue because our 20,000 small business clients lost 55% of their revenue, and our revenue turns out is an exact function of theirs.
Yep.
And so basically, what we're taught, and what you were taught, I'm sure, as well, in a lot of these same circles, is you want to do a very hard cut layoff early so that you can have a recovery story. You want to cut deeper than you need to, and then the next day you're back on the front foot, you're back to hiring, you're back to growth, and you protect your balance sheet. You're willing to sacrifice the people that got you here to protect your balance sheet, and then turn around and potentially bring new people on board or save the company or whatnot. And so we're just taught in situations like this, and you see it all over with Hertz and JCPenney, and I did like a Twitter thread even of like bankrupt companies that are doing all these layoffs, giving huge bonuses to the CEOs, or big companies like one of my competitors, Toast. They just raised $300 million on a multi-billion-dollar valuation, and right afterwards they laid off 50% of their team right after doing that. And so we're just kind of taught that this is the only way of doing it. And it's hard, but I think when people make different decisions like we did, we said, we're not going to lay anybody off. We're going to find a way to get through this together. There's actually a lot more benefit there than people realize. It's more viable, and I think we're proving that every day. But yet kind of the orthodoxy, if you just go around talking to people at cocktail parties or reading the books or whatnot, we're just told there's only one way to do it. And it's clearly wrong. So it kind of begs the question, why are we being told that? I think that we've convinced ourselves that people are not good, that people are bad, and capital and corporations are good. And I think if you look at the data that I'm seeing and the experience I have, it's exactly the opposite. I mean, when we got hit by the pandemic, our employees said, we don't want anyone laid off, and we don't want any increased fees or decreased service for our small business clients. And they got together. They asked for my permission, took some time, got together, and they said, we don't want anyone to get an involuntary pay cut because maybe somebody just had somebody else get laid off or had schools interrupted, and all of a sudden expenses went up. So they said, we're gonna try to get together and do an anonymous, voluntary, complete restructuring where people take anonymous pay cuts. And we had 98% of the company asked to take a pay cut anonymously, just through this like code of like number this person. And then they turned around, pivoted, and started working with 20,000 small businesses that trust Gravity to get them reopened and putting all these solutions into place. They did things like come up with like this app where like coffee shops can have Starbucks type order ahead coffee, where veterinarians can move the front desk to the car because we've sent a text message that opens up and they can close out their folio. And they pivoted and did all these things. And we're not going to make money for a while, and I'm okay with that, but we're going to survive. We're going to be able to keep helping these small businesses as long as they're still around to be helped. And I think that's an example where it was shocking to me, because when the employees pitched that to me as how we're going to recover, as a CEO, it just went against everything I was ever taught and everything all of us are taught, which is we try to sell each other out, we try to hurt each other. But that is the behavior of corporations. And if we can actually empower people and in some ways disempower corporations, or at least spread out the power a little bit, we're going to see more and more of that. And I think because the corporations are so bad, people come across as bad. If you deal with like a Comcast customer service rep, they seem like a genuinely bad person. And the reality is that person would do a fantastic job. They're a really good person if they weren't being so mistreated by the system and by their employer. And so I think that the cause for optimism that I have is we actually don't need to change people. We just need to change the system and the structure around people, take away what's constraining them, and then people will actually save us. But we have to actually do it, and that's the hard part.
Yeah, we have to overrun like the corporate system to give people a chance to bring out the best in ourselves. And I 100% agree with you that people, if you believe in them, like they expand. It's wild. Like you believed in your people and then they believed in themselves. And then when dark times come, they look around and say, okay, we can do something about this. Like, I'm not going to wait for like the boss to come and tell us what's up. It's like, like I care about you. I care about myself. Like, let's try and solve for this. But a lot of it was because you created that environment and you believed in them. The reverse is true too, that if you're a part of an organization where they treat you like shit all the time, and then like dark times come, then you'll be like, oh no, like one, I know they're going to get rid of me if they can. And two, like maybe I'll like throw my colleague under the bus because it's going to be like me or them. And like, and most Americans, unfortunately, are laboring under like the latter type of situation or environment because of the corporate logic you're talking about. It's like if you had enough human leaders like yourself creating cultures where people believed in each other and ourselves and cared about each other, then you could solve these problems.
Well, and I think that's why it's so important to get messages out there. Like I worked so hard trying to get this story out there. And people are like, why do you do it? It's like, well, if these stories can get out, people can see. Like, people ask me all the time, how do you motivate your team? I'm like, I don't try to motivate them. I try to not demotivate them. Like, I'm the bad guy in this equation. They're actually, they will do great job just on their own. And most people will out there. And so if we can take away that and invest instead in people's capability and give them actual license and power. But I feel like what we have to do is connect the dots between what you see happening at Gravity, the story I'm out there sharing, and what you're saying, because we can look at these as experiments. When we do what you're proposing in small settings, companies flourish, or at a very minimum, they still do okay. Like, I'm still here, I'm still happy, I'm still doing fine. And it's not like the lie we've been told is that the entire economy and all of our jobs will go away if we hold big companies accountable, if we put people first. And the opposite is true. As a whole, we will thrive. Now, will some people be less wealthy? Absolutely. And that's fine, because when Jeff Bezos comes out and says he has to start a space company because he has so much money, it's the only thing where he can possibly spend even a tiny percentage of his money that he cares about. That's a signal of like, hey, actually, he could take that same amount of money and he could pay 250,000 people that work in his warehouse as a living wage. Those people could then invest in their skills and they could get better opportunities, not be held back. And those shifts, if we can find a way to harness some of these stories and some of the data that we're seeing, I think the proof is already there. I just think we have to get the word out, and then we'll be able to fix this.
It's beyond vital. It's central. If you imagine a world where everyone's working for Amazon, which that world is happening. I don't know if you all can sense it. I mean, if you look at the Amazon employee count, like it's shooting up just as all of retail is closing. So it's not one for one, unfortunately. Like it's not like for every mall worker, like they're hiring an Amazon worker.
They eliminate 5 jobs and make 1, and they say they're job creators.
Yeah, and then they go around being like, "Hey, look at the jobs we created."
Yeah.
Like, we've got like all this good PR around it, and we're gonna yell at you about all the jobs we created. It's like, hey, like, have you looked at the retail sector? You're like, that thing used to employ 11 million people. You employ 11 million people at Amazon. They're like, no, but we employ, whatever they employ, like hundreds of thousands.
It's heartbreaking too to see the way they put the computers in charge of the humans at Amazon. That is really horrific to see. And there's, there was that Frontline documentary about this with Amazon. But basically, like, the computers tell them what to do. And they want the people to act with the same ruthless form of efficiency that the robots and computers do. And that's really horrific and heartbreaking to see, because it dehumanizes those people that are working. Then when you don't pay a living wage, it dehumanizes their home life. So they have their work life dehumanized and their home life dehumanized at the same time.
Well, my friends at Amazon are very open. They say, we're always just trying to automate our own jobs away. Like, that's just the culture of the org. It's like an efficiency engine, that place. That's from Jeff on down. Like, Jeff's sort of like a zealot when it comes to, trying to get things done as efficiently as possible, and that filters down pretty quickly. And the antidote really is people going out and doing what they want to do in their community in the form of a small business, and then treating their employees well, treating their customers well, treating themselves well last, because in my experience, small business owners have to look out for themselves after they look out for everyone else under the sun. But that's our only chance, really. This is the giant rebalancing I was concerned about, and now the pandemic has sped us up. So the stuff that Andrew Yang, Chicken Little dystopian figure, all of a sudden it's with us right now. I'm with you on being very, very concerned about the timing, Dan. It's like this stuff is mission critical and needs to get passed yesterday, and we don't have that much time. I mean, in my case, I'm obviously pushing for a change in leadership, and I hope that if you had, let's say, one party in charge of Congress and the White House, they could get massive solutions across the goal line that could hopefully help preserve a lot of these small businesses and these jobs, and the humans who have dedicated years, decades of their lives to building them in many, many cases. And that's the other part of it too, is that if you dedicate decades of your life to something and then you see it disintegrate, that's devastating.
Yeah, it's crushing. And we need, right now we're, Congress is in recess, and we need some type of relief for everyday people, for small businesses. We need to do something. And I just am we don't want to see this change happen, because it's going to be very hard to undo when many of our small businesses are going under.
As someone who's run a small business, it's not like you can flip a switch, your employees all drift off and find other opportunities, your vendors, close down the line, you sell the equipment or furniture. You can't just be and I'm back, in a lot of these cases.
Well, and the small businesses make those individual choices, as you highlighted earlier, that are more human. They're more in line with the human-centric economy that you've been championing, that I've been championing, because, they go out there, they know those people. They're not making the decision only based on what they saw in their business school class or what the spreadsheet says. They actually know the decisions they make, how they impact real people. And so if we want to make our economy more efficient and ruthless at making all of our lives worse, all we need to do is completely get dominated by all these large companies and monopolies. And if we want to stop that from happening, we basically need to sell out and do whatever we need to protect these small businesses, because they really are kind of, as the Bible says, a little bit of salt goes a long way. They are the salt for our economy, for our communities, having those small businesses still be around.
Thank you for listening in. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you did, please do subscribe to Yang Speaks and click on notifications so we can let you know every time we have a new episode.